building our ranks and continue to build progressive power throughout California. My name is Mehran Khodabandeh. I'm the senior strategist for the California Working Families Party, and I cover the Southern California regions, and I'm really excited to be with you all today. It's always amazing to see our volunteers and our members coming on from across the state to learn more about what's going on and to get educated about the roles they can play in changing California for the better. So with that being said, I want to really quickly just thank everybody for putting this together and thank Assembly members Kalra and Lee for giving us their time to talk about this so fresh after it happened. And with that, I'm going to introduce our moderator and the person that's going to be talking with the Assembly members today and going into what WP's priorities are. Our fearless leader and newly appointed state director, Jane Kim. As many of you know, Jane comes by our way from the Bay Area, San Francisco representing. She's been advocating for San Franciscans for years, starting on the school board, moving her way up to the Board of Supervisors, and then finally for Californians as a whole as Bernie Sanders' state director on his 2020 campaign. So we're excited to have her here at WP and continue to expand our ranks and the progressive fight. So with no further ado, I'm gonna throw it over to Jane.
Thank you so much, Mehran, and thank you all for joining us today. We advertised this event in less than 24 hours and we had close to 200 signups. So I think it just shows how interested folks are in what's happening in Sacramento today, and in particular about these two bills in particular that were authored by Assembly members Lee and Kalra, who have been our progressive working families champions up in San Francisco. Why I'm really excited is because, you know, part of what Working Families Party's goal is over the next 3 election cycles is really to highlight the significance of our California state legislature and why they matter. We often spend a lot of time spending attention on Washington, D.C. and Congress and the White House. You know, many of the things that impact us on a day-to-day basis, and I know folks on this room are familiar with, you know, our state legislatures are really one of the most important and critical legislative bodies in the country. In fact, the California state legislature passes at least 3 times as many bills than Congress on any given legislative cycle. And on most issues that we think about, ranging from criminal justice to public education to climate change and Green New Deal, these issues are being fought in the 50 state capitals of our country, and not just in DC, where our Congress is often in gridlock and often doesn't actually pass legislation that truly impact our everyday lives. Really excited to have both Assembly members Lee and Kalra on today to talk about 2 bills that we have been talking about nonstop the last few weeks, AB854 and AB1400. Both modest reforms on the Ellis Act, increasing tenant protections against speculator-based evictions, and legislation to actually enact single-payer universal health care here in California. So I'm going to start with Assemblymember Lee, who authored AB854. And I want to start with this bill because not as many people are familiar with the Ellis Act and what that is and why your bill matters. Assemblymember Lee, if you could just give a brief intro about AB854, why it matters and why I introduced it.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jane. Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm Alex Lee. I'm the state assembly member for Northern Santa Clara County and Southern Alameda County. So we introduced back in 2021 AB854 to reform the Ellis Act. And in a nutshell, what the Ellis Act is, it's a very specific tool of evictions by landlords. Now, granted, there is a whole menu of options of types of just cause evictions out there for landlords to use, but the Ellis Act is one that is especially ripe for abuse by big property moguls and empires out there, because unlike every other type of eviction out there, Ellis Act eviction is an entire building at once, and almost predominantly, they're always rent control buildings. And in the era of hot commoditization of housing, when you can turn, say, a 4-6 unit building full of rent control families into 6 individual $1 million condos, very tempting for folks. So what we've actually seen is a lot of big corporate property speculators. They come in, they buy property, and then they use the Ellis Act, which is not meant for this type of property speculation in the first place. They evict everyone and they turn them into condos. This is actively happening in San Francisco, in San Jose, in Los Angeles. So we authored a very sensible bill that all it says is you have to own a property for 5 years before you use the Ellis Act, because the Ellis Act was meant for small mom and pop landlords to use that to go out of business, right? So say you truly are a small elderly couple that has been in the business since the 80s, right? And they're just like, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to transfer the ownership or transfer the building over to someone else. But now, especially recently, 78% of those evictions happen within 78% of Ellis Act evictions occurred in the first 5 years. And a lot of those are out of state. And frankly, of course, there's California property interests as well that buy them up and flip them into units. That turns real affordable housing units into market rate units. And it's a huge problem. It's actively contributing to homelessness and evictions right now. Even during the COVID moratorium, people can still use the Ellis Act eviction. It is a loophole to use it even during our state of emergency. And that's why it's such a pressing bill to keep moving forward. We actually got it passed out of its first committees, thanks to Assemblymember Kalra, who is a co-author on the bill too, and he sits on Housing Committee. And we actually got it all the way to the floor. And just for precedence and just as context, as we're going to talk about the other bills too, there has never been an Ellis Act reform bill that has made it to the Assembly floor before. Also the same thing for universal healthcare. Never had one come to the Assembly floor before. And the reality is it is almost always customary that bills on our floor don't get taken up for a vote until they have the requisite amount of votes. And in the Assembly, we have 80 members, so that you take 41, which is 50 plus 1, 41 members to pass a bill. If you watched on Monday, last Monday, the FACTS Act, which protects fast food workers across the state, passed only by 41. We literally are such thin razor margins, and it is only worsened by, because we have right now actually 5 vacancies in the Democratic side. We actually lost votes right now, and it's making it much tougher to pass bills. But I'm not going to yammer on about Ellis Act. I don't know, Jane, if you want to ask me any specific questions about it, I could go on and on about it, but I don't want to.
Well, maybe you can explain why this is something that only the state legislature can take up and not individual city councils across the state.
Yeah, it's really important because the Ellis Act is a state law. Probably a little counterintuitively, and I don't agree with a lot of this, is a lot of tenant protection laws at a lot of historical reasons that I don't agree with are statewide level. So if you as a great city council are like, we should have rent control on all of homes, no matter when they're built, no matter what kind of home they are, you can't because it's a state law. Same thing with Ellis, it's a state law as well. So even though we're trying as much as possible to open it up and give local control back to cities, a lot of it is done at the state level. And that's, the historical power of big real estate. Actually, the Ellis Act took, I think, 19 years. It's like 19 attempts to even get into law. Well, sorry, the Costa-Hawkins took 19 attempts, which is the infamous one that prevents rent control in local cities. So they have been lobbying for decades and for many, many years to get it enacted state level because they know how hard it is to fix it at state level.
Thanks, Assemblymember Lee. When I served on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors and as an organizer, there are so many restrictions that I had, even though I worked on a very progressive city, served a very progressive city on a very progressive Board of Supervisors, at least on tenant protection issues. But there are so many arenas that we were stymied from supporting our seniors, our immigrants, because of restrictions at the state law level. And what many folks don't realize unless they work in this field is the vast majority of folks that are evicted are the most vulnerable in our communities. They're often seniors, they're often individuals with disabilities, they're often immigrants who speak English as a second language. And that's why it's so important that we pay attention as well to the state. Because often as activists, we'll pay attention to the folks in front of us. There are city council members, our Board of Supervisors. Tell me where AB854 is at right now.
Yeah, so AB854 unfortunately did not come for a vote because I did not have the requisite votes to be even taken up. So it did not get taken up on Monday. So that specific vehicle itself is dead. Though, because it was not taken up for a vote and wasn't actually killed, I can still bring back the measure in 2022. And that's something we're talking with our coalition partners right now, is whether or not we bring it back to 22, continue the momentum, or bring it 2023. I think we really are within the margin of victory. And if we didn't have those vacancies right now, I could have leveraged them into 41 at least and be able to pass it. but that's where we're at. So keeping our options open right now, reassessing with the coalition. The coalition, and there's some people on the chat here who worked really hard, phone banked, lobbied. We're reassessing our strength and seeing if we want to go for it again, 2 months in later again. But it's going to be a tough fight, even though this is such a modicum, reasonable tenant protection, resident protection. The big real estate interests really throw down hard, and it's one of our last, tenant protection bills out there. So really want to keep the momentum going, either this year or next year.
Assemblymember Lee, this is something that we often don't hear about or see because we're not in Sacramento with you all. This is my last question before I move on to Assemblymember Kalra. Tell us a little bit about what it's like to work in a city with a huge real estate and realtor lobby. And tell us a little bit about the scope of the dollars they spend and how that actually impacts your everyday discussion with your colleagues.
There's a lot of misinformation that gets out there, and there's a lot of good folks who, frankly, look, a lot of people don't understand the Ellis Act or tenant protections or housing policy at all. And it's just a very specific type of policy that's very hard to understand. And you have to remember that most folks in the legislature are economically secure. I am only one of the few people that does not own any property whatsoever, real property. So I come at it from a different economic lens. And it's okay, right? I think I'm not saying everyone should never buy a home or not have property, but when you graduate into a different mindset, it changes your individual perspective. And at the same time, there's a lot of real estate, I would say, propaganda that's out there, and they say all these things. And they say it really comes down to a balancing act of between quote unquote property rights and between real working class families that are protected. And it's too often that this debate has to be framed that way, when it's well, we can technically do both, right? You can still have economic prosperity, generational wealth, just a little bit more modest, a little slower, while it's also making sure people don't get evicted. So it's a bit frustrating, honestly, but it's why we have to keep pushing and having these perspective, right? We have so few renters in the state legislature right now that most folks, if they rented, was decades and decades ago, and that housing market was way different than the one I have to compete in now, even for housing. So it's important that we have to keep reminding folks. And I think there's a lot of people with good intentions. It's just, I have to cut through all the noise and all the propaganda out there. And it's kind of tiring to just keep knocking down all the real estate arguments one by one, but we do it because we're serious about the change. And I think we can get there.
Thank you so much. And in the end, I will ask you both more about, what we can do as activists, as organizers within our local community to combat all of the money and influence that the real estate industry has in Sacramento. Assemblymember Kalra, thanks so much for joining us. You introduced a very hot bill last year, something we've been talking about for a decade, certainly something the nurses have been talking about, something that frankly our own governor campaigned on, AB 1400, single payer universal health care. Many of us campaigned also for Senator Sanders when he ran for president in 2016 and 2020. It was a central part of his platform. And then unexpectedly, a pandemic hit our country, and we got to experience what the worst case scenario would look like when not everyone was covered by a public healthcare system. Tell us a little bit about AB 1400, what's in it, why it mattered, and where it's at the process.
Thanks, Jane, and I appreciate Alex for taking on such a significant industry straight out of the gate, coming into office, and proud to work with them. We're the only two corporate-free candidates right now, but with WFP and your leadership, Jane, and your team's leadership, I know we're going to double and triple those numbers in short order. When it comes to the issues of housing, certainly those issues, in California, no matter where you are significant, as is the case with healthcare as well. When last year introduced AB 1400 in February, and as many recall, a few years back when it stalled in the Assembly, part of the reason was that at the time, the speaker, wanted more substance in terms of financing and some of those issues that oftentimes come up. And so the bill was introduced in February, and then in April of last year, there were options to try to put funding into the policy bill that would have made one bill that would have ultimately needed 2/3 of a vote, or to try to have two separate bills. At that time, the speaker asked that, look, if you want the bill heard, you need to put funding into the bill and into 1400 and have it heard. In that case, it would have gone before the Revenue and Tax Committee in less than a week's time of that new language. And with a taxation system of over $100 billion, it was going to die in revenue and taxation. And so what happened at that time is I asked the speaker, I'm like, look, if I don't put it into this one bill and will you give me the opportunity to try to convince you that two bills makes more sense for this particular bill? And he said, yeah. And so what happened in the months ahead, when the bill wasn't heard in April, and it could have died in April if it was heard, but I opted to try to work to convince the speaker that it could be two separate bills. And so we worked, and the nurses and myself and my staff, and working with the speaker's staff in terms of trying to get there, and that includes the waiver issue. I went to Washington, D.C., met with the Health and Human Services to learn in more detail about the waiver process, because there was a lot of mixed messages that were coming that were coming in, including from the administration on what the waiver process entailed. And once we confirmed that you have to have a policy bill passed, you have to have legislative authority before you can apply for a waiver. At that point, we were able to convey that the Speaker's office and say, okay, we're going to have a separate bill that deals with the constitutional issues and the funding that would allow us to have the policy bill kept separate and allow to go forward on its own. It was at that time that we were able to get it heard in Health Committee. And thanks to the support of Chair Wood, we were able to get votes in Health Committee, although some of the folks that voted in Health Committee did not commit to voting it for it subsequently. With the new approach chair, I immediately met with the approach chair the day after Health Committee, set aside 20 plus hours of my own just to meet with members and hold Zooms. We have the nurses in there with us. We have the nurses with us much in many of those meetings. To answer questions, and we were getting tons of questions. Part of the issue was that because it's a 2-year bill, we only had a couple of weeks to try to get to get ayes, people to commit they're going to vote yes in the bill. And when it got to Monday, I was the day or two leading up to Monday, I was still calling folks, talking to folks. When I say folks, to members, nurses were also working hard. We were just trying to get confirmation of how many folks were going to go up on the bill. When it came to Monday morning, we were at 28 votes. Now, if we presented it, could we have gotten to 29, 30, 31? There's definitely a likelihood of that. But at that point, had a conversation, it was talking with the nurses. And when I say that, I mean the representative of the nurses that was communicating with me, not all the nurses and activists that have been on the mission for so long. But talking, I eventually talked to the Speaker's office, but that wasn't until the early afternoon. And during that time, we were getting some more answers back from colleagues that were indicating that we're not going to go up on the bill. And so my judgment, and very clearly and obviously the nurses had a different opinion on it. And we had a different opinion in April as well, where I was condemned for holding the bill in April, but I think that was the right path at that time. I used my best judgment, and this is my reasoning behind it. Part of it is that we have so many vacant seats as well as so many new seats that are coming in. Part of it is that even in the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, we're going to get at least 4 members that are in favor of single payer. Best case scenario, we probably get 6, maybe 7. I mean, 7 would be a dream. But in any case, given where members were at the time of the vote on Monday, we're going to need anywhere from 6 to 8 incumbents to vote for single payer healthcare. And a number of them, again, given the short time frame, we were having great conversation with, but they just weren't there. This is not a simple bill. For many of us, it is, because we believe in it, wholeheartedly. We believe in single payer to our core, but that's not where everybody else is. And but I believe, especially given the conversation I was having with colleagues, that given more time, we could have absolutely have gotten more members there, and given more time, we will get more members there. You combine that with the new members coming online And that's the winning recipe for success. We don't have a WFP until right now. If we had a WFP 2, 3, 4 years ago, I think it would be a different situation. We would have a whole bench of progressive candidates that would be coming in. That's what I hope to see in the next 2 to 4 years, where candidates are groomed early on how to run and how to win in these races. That being said, I get both the CDP Progressive Caucus, the nurses, and all the activists who have worked. I mean, we wouldn't be where we were without obviously the nurses, but also the activists and the folks that have been part of the movement. And I always say that the movement that it's about love and justice, and it's about truth as well. And I'm being truthful in what I'm saying. However, I also say it's not about a moment; it's about a movement. And I think I got lost in the moment of the legislative strategy, and I hurt people in the movement. And I think for that, I cannot be sorry enough. I do believe that we have a path forward that will be incredibly successful. As I've said before, I made a decision that my intention was to save the policy, even though it hurt me politically. I think it saves the policy. I think if we, and part of it is the mindset of how these things work out, where we go to a vote. I was very worried what happened 4 years ago would happen again, where we wouldn't get another single payer bill that would be able to get success in the legislature for 3-4 years. And the reason behind it is that if we go to a vote, it doesn't pass. Now, understandably, nurses who've been battling day in, day out for years on this, progressive caucus folks, activists, the movement folks that have been out in the streets and part of the movement, are going to, as the nurses say, want to hold accountability. Totally get that. And there's definitely, there are definitely folks that I believe will never going to vote for single payer, but I think there's a number of folks that would vote for it. And I think what ends up happening is if they run, in all likelihood, they're going to win re-election, and they're going to win having not voted for single payer, having the left come after them and having survived it, and come back next year having survived not voting for single payer and be more resolute in their position. That's a reality of where we are right now. The election's 4 months away. I know in my mind, and those of us that are progressive activists, we want to certainly believe that we can oust 10, 15 members. It just like, the last 10 years, one member has been ousted based upon the progressive movement getting behind a different candidate. And that wasn't just one, it wasn't just the nurses or the progressive caucus, it was a collection of both labor, environmental, criminal justice reform, all coming together to make that happen. And the reality is in 3 months with ballots coming out, I just think that's a lot to ask and expect. I do believe that we will be better and get better because of WFP. We have to, attack the misinformation. And, Alex was talking about the misinformation. You all saw the misinformation because I'm the first legislator ever working, obviously, with the nurses to do it, to present a funding mechanism that had never been done before. Now, what that also does, it creates the attacks, and we saw the misinformation and attacks that immediately started coming on how much people are going to be taxed. Obviously, creating deception and not talking about how much we pay now. We all know that. The problem is not all of our neighbors and all that. Some members are getting more no calls in than positive. I think with time, we can combat that, but it's going to take a massive movement on the ground in our community. It's going to take a massive movement for folks like WFP to get more electeds in there that aren't just going to vote for it, but are going to actively fight for it and be public in their activism for it. That's a big difference between having a yes vote and having an Alex Lee out there saying, I'm for 1400, I'm going to be out there, fighting, tooth and nail with you, Ash. It's a big difference. Those are the kinds of folks we need more of, in addition to more, yes votes.
So, Member Kalra, I just want, because this was the question that came up the most. So you have a lot of fans here, by the way. There's a ton of folks giving you love here. And last week, a lot of your biggest fans, as you mentioned, were incredibly disappointed that you didn't bring this to the floor for a vote. And it's not that people expected the votes to be there. I think everyone understood that the votes weren't there, but people wanted to know who was on our side and who wasn't. so that when we move forward to June and November, we know where to spend our energy and efforts. And I hear you on, it takes more than just one group to defeat an incumbent, right? We need a critical mass, a coalition that comes together to target folks that aren't with us or to hold them accountable so that they'll vote with you next year. So can you explain a little bit more? Like, for some people, they think, oh, was it just to protect your colleagues, right? And by the way, I wasn't elected. I understand that. You have to work with your colleagues every single day, and you need their vote on other bills, right? This isn't your only bill. So you don't want to piss people off. I get it, right? So on a certain level, there's that culture. And then the other is what you said was that perhaps this allowed this bill to live another day by avoiding that vote count. Could you explain that a little bit more? Because I don't think everyone understands that.
Let me start with the first part.
Because there was so much frustration over not knowing.
I get it. Listen, I get it. I take the anger at me. I knew that was going to happen. And so I don't make any excuses for that. Like folks that don't agree, I totally respect that. I totally respect the nurses. They're extraordinary. I totally respect HCA LA, the Santa Clara County, Single Payer Coalition, Healthcare Coalition, and the work that was put in by so many activists, the SF Bernie-crats, on and on and on. And I totally respect that they're mad at me. So on the first part, look, I've done things. It's not it's not like I've never, pushed forward legislation that has, that haven't upset my colleagues before. I mean, whenever I walk around or walk up to folks here, people are like, like here comes a cholera bill again. They know that I'm not there to do, quote, just easy stuff. That I've had 40 bills signed into law. Not all of them made it the first time. Not all of them went up to a vote the first time. But we were able to be successful. Part of that is coalition building, not just outside the building, but inside the building with my colleagues. And I think frankly, taking the hit this time added some credibility with my colleagues for me to help move some of them. The fact that we're going to have new members, if this was not a situation, let's say this was not the situation we're in, where we're just not going to have any new members next year and it wasn't realistic, that would be a different scenario. But the reality is we are going to get anywhere, I believe, again, we'll see what plays out, anywhere from 4 to 6 new colleagues in favor, at least 4 of whom I believe will be corporate free candidates. So that puts us in a very different position with the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 we have to move. Because now you're talking about bringing up that vote count, and that in itself brings pressure. I think the fact that colleagues, even after the vote, colleagues, I've had conversations and they're committed to getting to yes. And there are some very specific issues that they want to work on that I'm more than happy to do. That there's the benefit of time. And my staff was working tremendously hard. Nurses staff was working tremendously. Carmen Comsty, Michelle, I think the world of them. And they were working with my staff. One member gave us 26 questions the weekend before. Other members were giving us 10, 15 questions. And someone had, I saw a comment where someone's like, well, the bill had been around for a while. Why were the questions or why weren't these things answered earlier? Part of it is that no one knew exactly, there's a lot of 2-year bills. No one knows which ones are actually going to get to a policy committee hearing or not. And so the fact that it got to not just got to a policy committee, but it passed health committee, that made it, it's something that was more urgent. And keep in mind also, I was meeting with colleagues over the interim. I met with a number of them. I met with a number of health committee members. It wasn't like I was stagnant. I was very busy on this, trying to meet with as many colleagues that would have me, including Dr. Wood, who I went up to his district and had breakfast with them and just trying to get the bill heard, right? And so, and I do believe that that on some of the members we can get there. There's some that we won't, and that's fine. I think that at the end of the day, it's not incredibly. I get a vote makes it crystal clear on this one issue, but I think that if you look at vote counts on a number of different issues, including the fast food worker bill, you'll start to see, a kind of pattern with folks, including, money they take in and all that.
So just to clarify though, is not taking the vote allowing this bill to live longer?
In my opinion, yes. And that's, and because we had the opportunity to have it come back next year. that it wasn't taken up for a vote. And I think that it earned some of the grace of my colleagues that weren't prepared to vote for it. And I think that gives it survivability into next year. I think if a vote went up and it lost by 10, 9, 12, 11 votes, I think that would have been really damaging, especially if colleagues that we would need the vote for next time around were bashed for it. And everyone has the right to do that. And that's why I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying that I made the best judgment that I could. And I'm certainly far from perfect. And so, and I certainly apologize that it happened in such obviously so fast, and that people that had invested so much time, energy, and sweat into it, it hit them like a ton of bricks. And for that, I'm certainly sorry. It wasn't something that was orchestrated. It wasn't something even 2-3 days before that I was saying, this is what we're going to do. It was, something that when it came down to it, and I was getting responses even the morning of from colleagues, and made it quite clear that that we weren't going to get close. But that's where we had to have those discussions.
And one of the questions being asked is like, when will it be reintroduced? But my understanding is that it's still in the cycle, the 2-year bill cycle.
No, it's not.
No, okay.
Both my bill as well as the Alex's bill are no longer in the 2-year cycle. And so, at the end of the day,
when can it be reintroduced?
I think realistically, we'd have to wait for more members, frankly, if we want it to pass. And
but
so
there's no law, there's nothing preventing you from introducing it this cycle. That was the question.
I don't.
Not the political calculus, but when is the soonest it can be?
Yeah. I think literally, you could introduce a new bill. I think that I think that the better approach, and again, this is part of the reason why I made the decision I did, was to work on the attacking and getting kind of more prepared to combat the misinformation and deception, as well as getting more members on board that are supportive, as well as working on those members that aren't there.
Yeah.
That aren't there yet. I do think the governor hurt. I think the governor pushing himself away from single payer absolutely hurt, because as I'm laying out a path to how we get there, that includes a bill being signed, it did not help. It did not help at all.
Well, and I'm seeing this come up in the chat about the governor. The governor actually campaigned on a single payer healthcare pledge. And he's almost up his 4 years. He's running for re-election, and we haven't heard a peep from his office about single payer healthcare. And he even admitted in the fall that he hadn't read your bill. He hadn't read a bill about an issue that he campaigned about, central to his campaign. What can we do to put more pressure on our governor this upcoming year during his re-election cycle? We all supported and opposed the recall. He's probably going to win again in November pretty easily. What leverage do we have as voters and as organizers to push Gavin on supporting something in 2023?
Look, a big reason why I endorsed Gavin was because he was so publicly in favor of single payer healthcare. And I saw the nurses and others excited about it. He was so crystal clear on it. And so I think, honestly, the biggest leverage that we had was during the recall, right? Because even the recall, so many of us, so many of you, nurses were like, we're with you, Governor, with the hopes that, okay, we helped him beat the recall. Now he'll come around. And unfortunately, that it doesn't seem to be the case. And I think that now, I think it's a different kind of pressure when there's one person that's stopping, if a bill ultimately gets to his desk, I think, that's when the mountain of pressure has to appear, right? And by the way, that Kaiser deal is ridiculous. And a lot of us in the legislature are on a range from concerned to outraged about it.
So I saw in the chat someone wrote, we're preaching to the choir. Everyone here supports moving forward on a progressive agenda, supporting bills like the ones that you and Member Lee have introduced to support our most vulnerable here in California, with security within housing and in healthcare. So, I mean, really, like in our last 15 minutes, like what are the next steps, right? Like what can we do? So we have 32 open seats out of 120 this upcoming year in 2022. Originally, there was only 8 seats, like in November. So we've gone from 8 open seats to 32 open seats. How should we be spending our time? And how many seats do we realistically and practically need to win to actually have an impact in the 2023 legislative cycle? And I'm going to go to Member Lee first,
Okay.
and then to you.
You know, I think we have a lot of potential right now to pick up a lot of great seats, but I think we have to acknowledge the reality of the forces we're working against. While I think my kind of slightly more pessimistic outlook is that we will have a more solid working class, pro-working class voting bloc, but the net neutral of the voting will stay about the same, but it will be the intensity of those members is going to increase. We have a lot of work to do, especially towards 2024, when a huge, even bigger amount of members turn out and leave. And we can now warm, like this is like practice round 1, and we're going to get a lot of great people in. Round 2, we're going to hopefully have a majority in our house. That's what I hope for. But the reality is we have to fight really hard. The special interest forces, especially the corporations, they plan these things out really long, right? Like these, how certain departures happen, how certain successions happen. These things are gamed out and planned ahead of time, and they have a whole game plan. And we're playing catch up right now, unfortunately. So I think while our vote counts in the net world might stay relatively the same, our intensity can grow a lot stronger, and I think that's going to change a lot, right? I mean, look, my seat, we changed 1 member, and now we have all these crazy things happening at the state legislature, and Osh would agree. But so that shows that just how much one person can do. Now imagine if we have a whole team of us together doing it all together, is a lot more.
And sorry, I said I would go straight to Member Kalra, but actually it'd be great to hear a little bit about your 2 races, because neither of you were supposed to win, right? I mean, I remember Osh's race in 2016. And Member Lee, I certainly remember your race in 2020. I mean, you weren't even supposed to make it in the top 2 for the primary. Tell us a little bit about your race, the size of the districts, right? And what it takes to build a grassroots campaign when you don't have money on your side, right? The real estate industry will spend easily $1 million on each assembly district race. That's what I saw in the races that I've seen. There's 120 seats, and they have, you know, gobs of money, right? We know the healthcare industries have the same. So tell us a little bit from your perspective, what it took to come from behind and take out, you know, and to come in first place and win a seat at this table.
Osh, you wanna go first?
Go ahead, Alex.
Oh, okay. Look, I mean, I was outspent a magnitude 15-1 just by one other candidate in my race in 2020. You know, we were not meant to win in any regard. And, you know, like we were true underdogs. Like I thought we were not going to win literally up until even after election day. I remember the story I always tell is like Osh took me to the Capitol March like 11th, 2020. Remember, this is like a week before lockdowns started happening in California too. Took me to meet with the speaker in Sacramento. He was like, "Oh yeah, you won. Now you should go talk to the speaker." And I was like, remember that meeting? I was like, "This is really nice, but I'm not gonna win. Like the results are gonna change. Like I'm gonna not win." But lo and behold, we did it. I had $32,000. I was not an elected official, and I was 24 at that time. So it should not have been the case. And there's a lot of just a lot of dark money out there, a lot of money out there that's going to be spent against me again in this reelection. Like I'm made a lot of great friends in my work up here, especially with single payer. A lot of people are going to spend against me and try to get rid of me again. And that's just the reality of it is. So, I know what it's like to face defeat in the face, but it's still having to challenge the odds no matter what, because our cause is righteous. Our cause is just. We must keep fighting for it. My 88-year-old grandma always likes to say, like, you're not going to win the lotto if you don't buy a ticket. Right? So we have to try. We have to keep trying for these things. And even though they seem impossible and people honestly, people in Sacramento laugh on our faces when we do single payer and things like that. They're like, "Oh, it's never going to happen. Nothing." And then it gets Osh gets it through health committee, appropriations committee. And they're scared. There are interests that are literally scared. They spend so much money to just spam voters across the nation with texting. It's insane. I got people from Pennsylvania telling me, who's Osh Kalra? Why is he doing this thing? So it's scary, and that's the amount of money they're gonna spend on people against our candidates, against me, against Osh. It's just how it's gonna be. But I'm not used. I mean, I'm no stranger to impossible fights, and I know Osh is not a stranger to impossible fights either.
But really, like, so we saw you take on the impossible fight, but concretely, like, what do we need to do here in the Zoom to win in 2022? And also, Alex, you have some real challengers in your race. And maybe I'll go to Member Kalra, like, what does it take to win? I mean, assembly districts are actually not that big.
Yeah, but yeah, well, it's almost 500,000 people. So
It's only half a million.
Yeah, so it can be pretty significant in size. When I ran, I had over $6 million outside money spent against me. No one thought I was going to win it because I lost the primary by 15%. It was the biggest comeback in the state. And it was a movement. It was on the ground. So many of you I see here from San Jose were with me. Senator Jim Bell's here. He stood with me, even when people didn't think I was going to win. He believed in me. And when I won, there were a lot of shocked faces when I showed up in Sacramento, especially amongst those that funded that $6 million campaign, against me. And Alex is the same way. I love Alex Lee, and he's in a tough race right now. And so first of all, what can WFP do? What WFP could do is identify the candidates that are the corporate free that are running. There's so many running right now. I've endorsed like 5 already. There are corporate free Dems running both in the Assembly as well as in the Senate. Right here, Aisha Wahab is a huge one. Dave Jones, they're in this as far as Senate. Plenty of Assembly races, Pilar and others that are running. But what really matters to beat that kind of money are a couple of things. We're never going to match the money, but we need some money. And so even if you can't give Alex Lee $4,900, if you can give him $49, send $49 his way. And talk to friends to send $5, send $10, because it's only that cumulative effect. And at the end of the day, the corporate free candidate doesn't have to have as much money, because what the secret is that the people, when you actually send that message, and when I was knocking on doors, people would say, I don't know who wants you to lose, but clearly some people that have a lot of money want you to lose. So I'm with you, because it became so evident. And so we need boots on the ground. We need volunteers. And by we, I mean the progressive corporate free candidates. Alex and all these new candidates that are running, they need, because we can't match the money, we've got to beat them on the energy, beat them on the ground. And so take the energy from Ellis Act, from CalCare, and the anger and frustration, put that into these races, get on the ground, communicate with social media, but don't rely on social media. Social media does not win races. It makes us feel like it makes a lot of noise, more so than it actually impacts things on the ground to the actual voters. All that matters is the voters. Tell candidates, don't go to chicken dinners. Don't worry about club picnics and all that. You're going up to right now, 3-4 months to go. All Alex is doing is knocking on doors every day. We need that energy. We need you. Find the closest progressive corporate free candidate running near where you live. Dedicate time every weekend. Organize phone banks. Work with WFP. Real work. The real work is the only thing that could beat that money.
Member Kalra, one more question. It was a question on the chat. It was a basic question, and some folks know the answer, but how many votes will it take to pass AB 1400 in the future? And also the governor's veto.
I feel a little more optimistic than Alex. In I do think not only will we have more intense supporters, I think we will have more. And part of the reason is Jordan Cunningham, Republican, that's now a Dem seat, that I believe a pro CalCare candidate has a really good chance of winning. And so I think that, again, let's go with, I think a good case scenario, if not best case scenario, is we get 6 more folks elected that will vote for it. And I think at that point, we'll need a half a dozen or a handful more votes of the incumbents to get it across the finish line. And then it goes over to the Senate side, and we'll have to get 21 votes there. As far as timeline, we're not really necessarily losing out on the timeline of things, because we didn't have the votes for Monday anyway. But that being said, I think we have an opportunity to use the time in a very strategic manner. to not only prepare for the opposition better. For example, on ACA 11, one of the things I talked to the nurses about that we just didn't have the time to do in the shortened time frame on focusing on AB 1400 is a cost calculator. How much do you pay for your premiums right now? How much do you pay in copays, deductibles? How much would you pay under ACA 11, right? Because those are the kinds of things people need to see, that for 90% of Californians, both businesses and individuals, they can save money. But anyway, I can go on and on about it. But the point is that I think we will be close next year with us doing the work to get the good people elected.
So I've told people to throw up assembly members and candidates that they're excited about that are running that you think will be working family champions. We have 5 minutes remaining in our Zoom today, but I think the big message that I would close with is that we really need to elect and grow our squad in Sacramento. We can't just be depending on 2 members out of 120 to be leading a working families agenda. We need to grow that squad, and we're gonna have to do that up and down the state. So all of us are gonna have to engage. And this is a big year. There's 33 open seats and counting. 32 open seats and counting. We have a number of candidates that are running for state assembly and state senate. Folks have been throwing up some names on the chats. And, come join one of our 7 regional member committees and engage in our endorsement process as we figure out who this squad is going to be and what they're going to look like. And filing deadline is on March 11th. So candidates are coming forward over the next 3 weeks. WFP is going to be engaging in a very intense endorsement process so that we can endorse our squad by Friday, March 11th, and then start putting everyone to work, right? And it's not going to just be about social media, although that's important too. But as Member Kalra and Lee said, we have to walk. We have to get out there and knock on doors. Member Kalra, were you about to say something? I'll go to closing comments to both of you. But the big thing this year is, one of my goals coming on as the new California director for WFP, as some folks mentioned, we're a new organization in California. We may have a 20 plus year history in states like New York, but I've seen what WFP has been able to do in the Northeast. They have been able to move progressive members into the New York State Legislature. And we're now seeing more progressive tenant legislation coming out of New York than we are in California, which was a big deal for New York, right? Albany was very much choked by the real estate industry for decades. And to see that movement is a huge deal. And part of what I want to be able to do here in California is I want to make the state legislature sexy. I want people to want to run for state legislature. I want people to care about who their representative is in the state legislature, because this body is one of the most important bodies in the country. And not just because state legislatures do a lot in all 50 states, but in California in particular, 1 out of every 8 Americans lives in the state. So if we're able to move a progressive agenda in California, we're going to impact millions of Americans. And in a state like California, if we're able to move this agenda, we can show the rest of the nation what it means to govern progressively, right? California has that opportunity. Not every state does. And we're wealthy enough to implement these progressive policies. Some states can't consider a single payer universal health care because they don't have the revenue base to move that forward. But a couple of things that I'll just end with before I go to closing comments. 3 out of every 4 eligible California voter under 25 is a person of color, right? And something that I saw as California political director for Senator Sanders is we are seeing that base moving. In 2008, Obama, who ran as the more left candidate at the time, he won voters under 30 by 5 points. Senator Sanders, 12 years later in 2020, won voters under 30 by 50 points in California. So our electorate is changing. We are moving to the left, but we need to continue to organize and get these voters out and also explain to voters why Sacramento even matters, because so many Californians don't pay attention to what's happening in Sacramento, despite how critical our state legislature is in impacting the lives of working Californians. So want to get some closing remarks from Member Kalra and Member Lee, and then I'm sorry about my comment about Obama, but 2008 was very different in terms of our candidate pool than it was in 2020, right? I definitely do not consider Obama a progressive, but at that time, I do think that he was considered the more left candidate amongst young voters. So that's why I brought that point up, but I completely understand where that comment is coming from. But closing comments from member Kalra and Lee, and then we'll go back to Mehran, our California senior strategist, to close out.
Thank you. First of all, I saw someone was kind enough to put my donation link. Don't give to me, give to Alex Lee if you're going to give to either of us. He needs the help. He really is. He may not ask for it, but I hope he will, but he's in a battle and we need Alex to stay in Sacramento. Second thing is, I think, one of the points is that, that has been brought up is that Californians, elected Bernie, they support single payer healthcare in polling, but most of them didn't know about 1400. The numbers grew as the nurses and activists were on the ground informing people, but we still have to grow the fact that, look, California, not just single payer in concept, but California can do it. And the last thing I'll say, I just want to thank all of you for your grace. I apologize for, certainly the communication and I think things that could have been done differently, but I assure you that I'm as committed as ever to single payer healthcare here in California. And I know that we wouldn't have gotten the bill as far as we did without all of you, and we're not going to get it any further without all of you. So thank you all so much.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank you all for your tireless work in this. There's so many familiar names, and I wish I could say faces on this Zoom call right now that I know you work so tirelessly. But the fact is, we need to build real lasting real lasting infrastructure and mobilizing network. What we're up against is true entrenched power, right? They have so much money, like $4,900 checks is something they just sneeze out. They have that money. They have so much power, they have so much money, but they don't want that status quo to be threatened. I have heard several times from people through the grapevine that they want me not elected anymore because they want to snuff out the corporate free movement. Before I got here, we didn't really have the corporate free caucus, and Ash and I created it. But it's so important to be fighting against that status quo, and that really takes your continued engagement and growing our organized network. There's so many great organizers out here, but how do we expand an infrastructure? I think that's through WFP, and make it lasting and make it competitive in against these special interests, right? My motto is always like, even if you're cash poor, you can be volunteer rich, you can be people rich, right? And that is really how we get there. I mean, Ash and I are going to keep doing bills tackling corporate money. We have a bill right now, AB1400, so check that out, 1819 on corporate money, and we're going to come back at it. But we need to even the odds and build that infrastructure, because that's how we win. And we have to have a concerted effort to stay engaged. Like Jane mentioned about, voters under 25 or something like that. Voters under 25, I'm cut off now, I'm 26. But, it's so important that we stay engaged relationally and hold people accountable the same way. In my district, I have to leave in a bit because I'm doing office hours with my constituents one-on-one. But we have to be honest with our elected officials and say, hey, where were you on this bill? If you're going to do this, I really want you to be doing this. If I'm supporting you, I really want you to be championing out there. That's the kind of people I have holding me accountable in my community. I have people expressing their differences, opinions, and it's important, right? You have to have a good relationship and continued relationship. Do it because remember, not just one phone call, one email is going to make a difference. You have to be consistent, because the opposition, they're always going to be in our face and consistent. They're going to be with money, with messaging, and we have to be just there all the time as well. So I thank you so much for all your incredible work that you do at WFP. Keep up the momentum, and we're going to win big in 2022 and then even bigger in 2024. Thank you so much for all.
Thank you, members Lee and Kalra. And thanks to folks for joining. We're going to go to Mehran, who will close us out and also talk a little bit about next steps on what we can do to change the conditions for 2023.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much, Assemblymembers Lee and Kalra, and thank you, Jane, for facilitating the conversation. As you can see, my house is not lit perfectly, but it looks like I'm enlightened, and I hope you are all enlightened by this great conversation. I think a lot of us don't know what happens behind the scenes, don't know what happens in the halls of Sacramento, and I just want to say I appreciate the leadership of Assemblymembers Kalra and Lee in fighting for these important bills and doing that day in and day out and negotiating with people that aren't operating with the same passion for the working class that they do. So I really want to appreciate them and make sure that's out there. But everybody's asking for support. Everybody's asking for these contributions. We need that platform, these platforms to exist, to carry forward, to get more people up to Sacramento. So I am going to be asking you to support the work we are doing here at WFP. We are also a corporate free entity. We don't take contributions from these entities that want to flood our processes and flood Sacramento and get what they want so they can handle the bottom line. Our bottom line is making sure working families are supported. So I want you all to take out your phone. Everybody take it out. And I want you, if you aren't a member already, to text CAWFP to 30403. Once again, that is CAWFP to 30403. That'll make sure that you get all of our updates, and that'll also give you the opportunity to become a member of the California Working Families Party.